Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We are so happy to have you here for our Black History Month webinar. The title of this webinar is Young, Gifted, and Black Children as Active Agents in Their Own Liberation. I do want to announce to you that we will be posting on social media throughout. Feel free to do so. The hashtag is hashtag CRESTS program, CRESTS, CRESTS program, all one word. So feel free on Instagram, on Twitter, if you hear something that you want other people to know is going on and you'd like to share with your followers, please feel free to do so. What we'd like to do now is to introduce, of course, Dr. Constance West and I are co-founders of CRESTS Achieve. We encourage you to go to our website and learn more about who we are and why we started CRESTS Achieve. In the midst of COVID, we thought this was really important to do. We have our bios here. They're also on the website. But we want to introduce our staff as well before we get to the panelists. I know you want to hear from the panelists.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I have the pleasure of introducing our two staff members. Both have been recently added to our team. The first is Ashley Rebes. She is our CREST graduate assistant. She is a third-year graduate student, a doctoral student, in the Counselor Education and Practice program at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where actually I'm located. Ashley's academic and professional interests include multiculturalism and social justice, African American women, counseling couples and families, generational trauma and healing, as well as group work. Ashley is also a current National Board of Certified Counselors Doctoral Minority Fellow. She is a Chi Sigma Iota leadership intern, um, Southern Association for Counselor Education and Supervision emerging leader, and serves as an editorial assistant for the Journal of Counselor Leadership and Advocacy. As our graduate assistant with the CREST program, Ashley will be helping to develop promotional materials, to manage the CREST website, engage in research, coordinate webinars such as this one and chats, and to disseminate the CREST newsletter. And she's done a great job of that. You can get access to the newsletter on our website. Our second staff member, actually the newest member of the team, is Janae Bond, and she is our social media intern. And she is a 21-year-old woman born and raised in Toronto, Canada. Janae has always had a passion for the arts and the area of communications. She's always showed a sense of creativity and originality, which she's definitely demonstrated thus far working with us. She started her business, and the title of her business is Graphics by Janae. Her goal there is to supply current and future clients with high quality graphics that suit their brand's image along with excellent customer service. So we welcome the two of them and we look forward to all of that they will contribute to the work that we do here with the CREST program.
Thank you so much, Dr. West. I am excited to introduce the stars of the show today, our panelists. So our first panelist, Dr. V.P. Franklin, is a distinguished professor emeritus of history and education at the University of California, Riverside. He served as the editor of the Journal of African American History, formerly the Journal of Negro History, since 2002. He is the author of 5 books, including The Education of Black Philadelphia and Black Self-Determination, A Cultural History of African American Resistance. He's also co-editor of 5 books, including Cultural Capital and Black Education, and Message in the Music, Hip Hop, History, and Pedagogy. And he's published over 70 scholarly articles on African American history and education. So we're so excited to have Dr. Franklin with us today. Our next panelist is Dr. Carmen Sidbury. She's currently Senior Director for Research and Development at the National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering. She's previously served as Director of the Center for Education and Science, Technology, Engineering, and Science at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She's also written, published, and presented research findings at national conferences, and she's a member of several organizations, including the American Evaluation Association, National Society of Black Engineers, Society of Women Engineers, National Association of Multicultural Engineering Program Advocates, and a founding member of the Society of STEM Women of Color. So welcome, Dr. Sidbury. And our third panelist is Dr. Michael White. Dr. Michael White is an accomplished, multifaceted New Orleans-based clarinetist, band leader, composer, musicologist, jazz historian, and educator, widely regarded as one of the leading authorities and culture bearers of traditional New Orleans jazz music. Dr. White earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in Spanish education from Xavier University of Louisiana, and then went on to receive a PhD in Spanish literature from Tulane University. He currently serves as the Keller Endowed Chair in the Humanities at Xavier University of Louisiana and teaches African American music history. He's performed in 30 foreign countries, played on over 100 recordings, received countless awards, made multiple national television appearances, and been featured in major media publications. He's also written and published several dozen essays on jazz. So welcome, Dr. White. As you can see, we're in good company today, and we're really, really excited to welcome all of our panelists. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ashley. Well, with that, we do want to announce that there is going to be a contest that we're launching today, actually, because we want to do more than just talk about these issues. It's always important to do something about it. And so we're launching a contest. And what we want you to do is in social media, or if you're not on social media, you can send us emails where you will provide us with what your New Year's resolution is for 2021 and how you'll use a new activity or a tool for working with Black children. So send us your ideas of your commitment, your ideas of what you plan to do this year. And then we're going to collect all those, pick the top 5, put them on our website, and then have the public to vote. And then the winner will receive a gift certificate that they can use at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. So we hope that you'll participate. Feel free to do so. So I'd like us to get started. We are totally ready to do this. And so I'd like to jump right in with the first question to our panelists. So our first question to you is, how did you, as a child, counter systemic racism in your community or school or maybe home life? Or if you didn't, talk about that as well, because we know not everybody knows how to or could counter racism, or we're even aware of it. So that's our opening question. How did you as a child counter structural racism anywhere in your life? Anybody can answer.
So,
yeah, you're on mute.
I think am I still mute? No, not
Nope,
still
we
mute.
can hear
Okay. All right. So yes. So I had to think about that question, but as a child, yes, I think for me, I grew up in small rural town in eastern North Carolina, and so grandparents were farmers. Um, Mother, hadn't finished high school actually when I was in high school, and so very rural town. And I'll just say lots of white people. My high school class was only 100 kids. and about, maybe 10 to 12 African Americans. And so there's a sense of people wanting to always define your place in space as one of not being, that you're not one of authority. Often the challenge of even simple things of, if you were confrontational with perhaps a white person, it could cost you your life. So while I grew up in the 60s, just, post civil rights movement. And so that was real right in front of my face, right? And so my brothers and sisters were some of the first to integrate our high school. We had a African American school that was bombed, actually, Georgetown School in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And so those things were like right there in your face. But for me, and I think my parents and my community really rallied behind this ideal of always being the best. And so there's there's a sense of pride and accomplishment that comes with that. Of course, there's a tax also that comes with always having to feel like you have to be the best, right? But for me, I think it was always because I had a strong community support system, um, that despite those things, that people believed in me. And so there I could walk into those spaces and deliver and be the best that I could be. It's taken me a while to actually kind of frame it in a way that, yeah, I was combating racism with the tools that I had for me to work with. And certainly a community believing in the possibilities made all that a real thing for me.
Dr. Franklin, you were on mute before. What were you saying to us?
Oh, I was going to say that my family was involved in civil rights activism in Philadelphia when I was a child. And one of the actions that they engaged in was the protest around Girard College, which was a secondary school that was located in North Philadelphia where we lived. And it was only open to all white boys at that time. They would not allow, now this is in a predominantly black neighborhood, this is the college, surrounded by a 10-foot wall and with hundreds of students enrolled, but no African American students. It's in the heart of the Black community. You have to keep that in mind. So my uncle was a photographer for all of the newspapers in Philadelphia, particularly the Black newspapers, Jack Franklin. And so he took pictures of all of the protests that were launched beginning in May of 1965. And there were for 6 or 7 months, people in Philadelphia marched around under the leadership of Cecil Moore, marched around Girard College to try to demand that it allow uh, orphan Black boys be allowed to enroll. And so we were on the picket line. So I was on the picket line with my father, with my aunt, and with all these other children in Girard College. And I have a whole section in my book on with photos, my uncle's photos from 1965 of the children and teenagers. For example, what is interesting is that the gang members in North Philadelphia were recruited by Cecil Moore, the head of the NAACP, to serve as the marshals for the protest, for the lines of protest around the school. And so young people, the desegregation was for young people, but young people participated, and I was among them because my family was very active in civil rights protests in Philadelphia.
Wow.
Well, um, yes, I grew up in New Orleans in the early 1960s, and I was in one of the first black families to move into a previously all white neighborhood. And systemic racism was a part of our daily lives, and it was a very difficult thing. I remember for several years we were terrorized in our homes, attacked at night with various different things. The way we encountered it in the family was to try to deal with it through the law. So I remember many nights of having my parents call the police, and the police would come, and sometimes they would pick up the perpetrators and ask them why they threw rocks at this house, or toilet paper or eggs or balloons filled with, let's say, liquids, um, yelling things and all of this. And so that's kind of how my parents dealt with it. In terms of school, though, I had difficulty as a child trying to understand why I I had to be sent to a school that was several miles away, a bus ride, two bus rides away, when there was a school, a Catholic school, less than a half a block from my house. But that Catholic school was all white, and it was very, very difficult at that time in the neighborhood. So my parents dealt with that racism in the sense of by avoiding it, by sending me to black schools. So in a sense, they didn't resist, but at the same time, in the Catholic schools, even in the black Catholic schools, the majority of teachers were white nuns, and although they had this kind of angelic, reputation, let's say, among, uh, the Catholic people, sometimes some of their practices were pretty racist. For example, I remember being told that people who weren't Catholic were going to hell, that they were going to burn eternally, that they were, and believe it or not, people that were Baptist and sang hymns like Mahalia Jackson, for example, were, I remember these exact words, savages. And that created quite a lot of problems and confusion for some of the kids because, some people were Catholic. There are a lot of black Catholics in New Orleans, but there are, Baptists and sanctified in other religions. So some kids would get in trouble because the nuns would tell them, for those practices in those churches, they were going to go to hell. And so you had these little kids you're going to telling their relatives, you're going to go to hell. And then, it ends up with you getting slapped in your face or something by your parents. But, in the community, I had a lot of difficulties. For me, just going to the grocery store one block away or going to the Catholic church, which was, again, less than a half block away, were pretty traumatic experiences. And I did not always encounter systemic racism as a child in the right way. I'll just mention this one quick incident. I remember I was riding my bicycle around the corner, and I was chased by these white kids who were calling me names, and they got on their bikes and they chased me, and they ran me into this very sharp thorn bush, and I got all cut up and scratched up, and you know crashed into this bush, and my bike, I dropped my bike, and I ran back to my house, but instead of telling my parents, I ran to the backyard where I had a long black baseball bat. And the way I encountered that was I marched around the corner to where these kids were living, and I tried to find them. And I'm glad I didn't find them, because I would be wearing an orange suit right now. But it was a very difficult thing, and I'll just say that in a lot of ways it was very confusing to deal with racism in its various manifestations as a child. So sometimes we did it through legal means, sometimes we did it through avoidance, and occasionally, like I said, as a child, I mean, I responded, you know, let's say violently.
Wow, all three of you have provided some really illustrative examples from your own lived experiences, and I think it's so important for us to connect to children that this is not a theoretical thing. This is not, some academic thing. They're real children with real lives who are experiencing this. And I think sometimes people look at successful scholars such as yourself and they think you're successful because you didn't have those problems, because you didn't experience those things. And what I'm hearing from all three of you is that you did, and that different aspects, different forms. I hear support, encouragement, believe in yourself, the idea of fighting back. And I heard that in all three ways, fighting back. So definitely that is loud and clear. So I'd like to hear as the second question, well, what then are some of the struggles and challenges that Black youth have had in the past, but also in the present, like right now, 2021? What are some of the, because sometimes we don't have the language. Sometimes we're thinking these things, we're feeling these things, but as parents, as educators, as mental health professionals, sometimes we don't have the words to be able to respond to those folks who say, what? These kids have it better than ever. So what do you all say to that?
I guess you got the gentlemen are letting ladies go first, so I'm going to take advantage of that.
We both
So
do that all the time.
okay, okay, I'm using up my 2 turns now. So in my field, I'm an engineer by training, and when I think about the state of things now, still, for many people, my discipline, math, we struggle with making this subject relevant to our young people, to anyone, and we often, it's dismissed as not necessary. We don't make the connection with the why, and even that this is indeed an area where we as people have excelled. Uh, you know, if we think about civilization and we go back to our people beyond just our experience here in America, we certainly have always had the ability and aptitude to do science and engineering and mathematics. But I think so when I think about some of the same challenges with the fact that a lot of there's a lot of talk about us being underrepresented in these fields, but yet we live in a society where certainly technology is all around us, and people are creating this, and some of it not necessarily um, designed for always for good. I'll just say that, and certainly not inclusive. Um, and so as we think about now, I think this pandemic, and we are in this space of people are suddenly really embracing the ideal that things are not equal, right? So access to broadband internet, which is now almost a necessity, right, for you to continue school. Um, and so when we think about those kind of things, I think the structural challenges, they show up in so many ways that we often sometimes we get distracted by some of the successes. So we've had an African American president. We've made some big strides, some of us as individuals, but collectively, there's still a lot of work to be done. And so until all of us can really um, capitalize on our full potential, I think, for us to unpack the reason why that's not happening, that we can't abandon the work because a few of us are able to break through, but we really need more of us to have opportunities. And so while I do think, you know, things are not the same as they were 20 years ago, but in some ways, depending on what your metric is, some of the gaps between people being able to realize their potential, some of those options, those gaps are getting bigger, and the potential for you to do it because things are moving so quickly. And I certainly see it, in my space of technology, where it can be a great enabler and equalizer, but also because of that, once people have access to it, the people who have access and those who don't really those gaps and closing those gaps become even more challenging for us.
I think one thing that's a constant in the past and the present is that black youth have to struggle with the idea of self image, self concept, what it means to be black. They see on television, they see through various experiences, uh, violence, even into the present, perpetrated against blacks. They have to deal with and try to, figure out and ask their parents. They're curious about why is this going on? Why are things happening to black people? I remember in the past, as a child, I had, you know, uh, issues with things about appearance coming from television. I remember they used to have this men's hair tonic. I don't know if it's still out there, but it's called Vitalis, and they used to put it on you'd see this guy slicking it on his hair and he just combing it back. And my father had Vitalis, and of course we didn't have that kind of hair, but I would put Vitalis in my hair, and it never quite slicked back, and I couldn't figure out why. So one day my father came home and a half bottle of Vitalis was missing because I had put it all in there and trying, but I couldn't understand what was the issue or what was the problem. And my mother would tell me all the time, why can't we go here, or why do we have to sit on a certain side of the restaurant, or why can't we use certain water fountains or restrooms, or why do we have to sit in the back of the bus and all of that. And her answer was always the same thing: because we're colored. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't understand. So, you know, unfortunately, growing up, I dealt with that through the perspective of feeling inferior. And so I think the whole idea of self image and self concept is something that kids have to deal with today. What does it mean to be African American? What does it mean to be black? What is the difference? Is it always something positive or negative? Sometimes when we see these images that are portrayed on television in the media, many times they're stereotyped and limited or negative. You have to kind of, you know, be able to talk to children about that, about blackness, about black history, because sometimes you can feel lost, like you don't have a place. And I think a lot of kids are dealing with that.
Dr. Franklin, you're on mute again.
Um, I certainly can agree with both of the statements. The technology gap that exists for between African American children and other children, more uh, wealthy children, that is crippling their educational achievement and advancement. That's certainly something that they're facing. I also have the understand the negative portrayals and information about African Americans. And I think that this pandemic, I mean, one of the things that this pandemic has revealed is that I'm hoping the young people now should have 2020 about the disparities that exist. 2020 demonstrated all of these disparities that exist for African Americans in general and for African American children and young people in particular. Uh, we have 2020 vision now about these disparities. And so in healthcare, in education, with that, in technology, in housing, in education, so that these disparities have been revealed, and that uh, are going to have a negative effect on our children and our young people. And we have to provide them with uh, options and alternatives and approaches to try to deal with some of these things. You have the inadequate educational resources that we've already mentioned. You also have penalization through the testing, the high stakes testing that is penalize our children and stuff. And so the children have to decide on, all right, given the conditions that have been created by the pandemic, should they participate in this high stakes testing? I mean, they've been out for, out of school for a year and all this, and then they're going to try to say that, oh, we're going to determine whether or not you go from one grade to another through some testing. And the students, the young people are going to have to decide, whether or not they want to participate in that they want to be evaluated other ways because they've been shortchanged in terms of their education as a result of the pandemic. And the other thing that is really new and that the young people have to deal with and should pay and we should figure out ways to try to help them with, and that's student debt. Student debt, because we know that all of the statistics tell us that African American children and teenagers and adults graduate from institutes of higher education with much more debt than other students, than non-Black students, and so we have to put pressure on institutions to come up with ways to ensure that these students graduate from these institutes of higher education debt free. And if the students and this is a situation where that was not the case in the past. I attended when I was teaching at the University of California. I had colleagues in the history department, my colleagues in the history department that went to undergraduate school, master's, and PhD in the University of California for free, for free. They had, they didn't have to pay anything. And I certainly graduated from college and a graduate school and doctoral debt free. And I think that that's something that the young people should say, okay, we're going to organize to try to make sure that we don't graduate from institutions of higher education weighted down with huge debt. And that's something that I think that they can mobilize around and organize.
Well stated, well stated. Now, what we would like to do is to ask some specific questions to each of the panelists. So, Dr. West, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay. I think that I'm following Dr. Franklin's lead about forgetting to turn off on mute. But the first question, interestingly enough, is actually for Dr. Sidbury. So even though we were trying to say it wasn't always going to be ladies first, the way that we designed it is that the first question is actually for you. And it's related to STEM. So one of the things that you had mentioned when you were talking earlier is that by history, especially our history prior to being here in the United States, but even since we've been in the United States, there have been models of Black excellence in STEM. And I wanted to get you to talk a little bit about that and in terms of our ability to do well versus our underrepresentation and some of the issues that we face when we are, either going into STEM or when we're in STEM programs that may cause us to have difficulty that may not be related to our ability, but our experiences in STEM programs.
Yeah, so I think, certainly much of it is attributed, I think, to our exposure and experience. And even, I mean, certainly the data supports, and then I'm going to speak more about engineering, but STEM in general. Often math is the foundational place, and to many it is calculus or algebra. And so when we even look at our schools, if we look at schools by community or district and who's in the school, many of our schools where African American students are attending, often you won't find a pre-calculus class or something of that nature. Or if it is, it's populated by the few non-African American students that may be in the school. So they almost have a lock on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of how many of the STEM disciplines define who looks like a good candidate for the major, it's often based on already demonstrated some of those capabilities, but seldom do they really look at can we address some of those gaps perhaps that students have, and I think also too, even back to why some of our students aren't in taking those classes. often the content is not as relevant. I mean, there's a lot, and this follows all the way through college that often young people check out, um, from a STEM career or a major because the content, the gatekeeper courses that are stacked at the very beginning of the process really don't lend themselves to the why. Why am I, banging my head up against this physics and calculus? Where is it going to be applicable in my bigger aspirations in life are to do something to benefit the bigger society. And so we fail to make the connection often why STEM is absolutely necessary and beneficial to our society and really helps us address problems that our people specifically may have. And so I think there's often been a very narrow definition of what excellence and even potential looks like for a STEM major. And so, we're making some strides there. And actually, what we find when we address what initially some people may have defined as maybe perhaps viewed it as a deficit for, say, African American students coming into um, higher education, we often find it's the same. All students have these problems. And when we address this and when we really look at how we can make the learning experience better for African American students, it makes it better for everyone. And so some of the things that have been vetted and considered now best practices really are starting to be adapted across the field. And it's not blaming the student so much. It really is looking at the system and how we even present and teach materials. And so in some ways, the just the mere fact that we're there, um, and then that we find ways to persist, we make the learning and the education experience better for all students.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. White, this question is for you. How has music been used as a tool for the liberation of Black children? And can you give us some examples of some musicians in history or in the present that have made or will make a difference in countering racism or racist attitudes towards Black youth?
Well, black music has always been very important as a part of the black experience in America. In New Orleans, we have a lot of very unique traditions, partly fueled by a long-standing tradition of authentic African music and dance, which kind of synchronized with other musical styles and then led to the development of our own unique rhythms, musical traditions, and expression.
Mhm.
And a lot of times that expression was a way of community bonding, a way of families, neighborhoods uniting in a larger cultural creative process. So one of the things that's been important in New Orleans culture has been the birth and the development of jazz among the African American population in the 1890s. Um, and jazz has remained family and neighborhood tradition that has been passed down through the generations.
Mhm.
So a lot of children experience not only the music but the importance of music. Music was a means of it was a means of overcoming societally imposed invisibility. One of the most important characteristics of New Orleans style jazz is to develop and have your own unique tone, your unique expression and rhythms that are as unique as your own voice or your handwriting or your facial features. And by doing that, you become recognizable, you gain respect, you can express through the music your true feelings and emotions. You can gain a certain degree of mobility that was not allowed uh, in everyday, society relationships. And so that was an important thing. And a lot of kids learn through example that rather than being, considered less than, that you could actually develop a musical personality that overcame a lot of the societal limitations. So, you know, a lot of kids would follow along, for example, in these large social club parades that are better known as second lines today. But these social club parades, and they would follow the bands and the musicians, and a lot of people learned in their family traditions, you know. And in addition to jazz, we have the Mardi Gras Indian tradition, which is related to music and social clubs, and all of those involve young people, and those young people get to experience this unique kind of community bonding, where you become a part of a whole, but at the same time your individuality is encouraged, and that's something really special and unique, and we see that a lot. There are many examples from the past and the present that relate to what I was saying. One of those is there was uh, back around the early 20th century, there was a youth who grew up in a poor neighborhood. His mother, his family was broken. You know, his mother was a street worker, let's say. He was very poor. He didn't have many opportunities. He had limited education, and it seemed like he would have a bleak future, to say the very least. But and this youngster was placed in a waif's home for shooting a pistol, you know, and he spent a couple of periods in the waif's home, and there he learned music, and he heard, when he got out, he heard music all around him, and he was very influenced by that music, and that music not only changed his life, gave him new opportunities, but it changed the whole world, and I'm talking about Louis Armstrong. So that's a prime example of how music affected a youth in terms of his development, his image. It was a way of overcoming a lot of the racist limitations of the society and the times he came up in. But even coming more toward the present, I mean, we have young people in similar circumstances. There's a young man that comes from a musical family. Um, today, and you know, he's a well-known artist around the world. He's very popular, named Trombone Shorty. Uh, you know, Troy Andrews, and his family. I mean, he came from a family of musicians, and you know, sometimes some of his relatives had limited opportunities. He had a brother that was, you know, killed at a young age, but Troy was adopted and given a certain kind of education, and he was able to combine the formal music education with the spirit and the uniqueness of the streets and turn that into something very positive. And again, you know, he's making great strides in the world as a successful musician. So his whole life and career has changed because of that. We also have young brass bands, and once again, you know, a lot of the musicians that wouldn't be doing anything else, or some of them have admitted would have probably been into trouble, uh, make a living as playing as musicians in brass bands, and they travel all around the world. And you know, that's another thing. It's opened up not only opportunities but life in the whole world to them in ways that they normally would not have had through, you know, normal education, etc. And we have many examples of that. I'll leave you with one last one, which
Mhm.
is a musician, another one from a musical family. And again, we show the importance of these musical families because kids come up realizing that the culture and the culture of your music is an acceptable thing as a way of life and identity and bonding and all of that. But, you know, some of these young people are given opportunities with music and they take it very far. This young man, John Baptiste, who's the pianist, he's on the what's that late night show?
Trevor
Uh,
Noah. Hmm.
Steve Colbert, yeah. And
Oh,
you
oh
know,
yeah.
he's a
Look at that.
phenomenal musician, but he came from, you know, a New Orleans musical family. He ended up going to, I think he graduated from Juilliard Music School, and so music again has the power and ability to change lives and overcome some of the limitations that society has placed on people throughout the ages, and fortunately, that's still the case.
All right. Thank you so much for giving us those really good examples. I was wondering where you're going when you were describing the first youth, and it turned out to be Louis Armstrong. I was like, okay, that's nice. And Trombone Shorty, I don't know how many people amongst the panelists or the participants were already familiar with them, or even thinking about um, the ways in which music has been used to overcome stereotypes, to foster a sense of community, a sense of identity and bonding, to provide upward mobility when the schools have failed in some ways or society has failed our young youth, um, and to be able to sort of reinvent themselves and to use their own voices. So I really appreciate you sharing that information with us, Dr. White. And Dr. Sidbury, I think that what you had to say about the fact that it's not about Black children not having the ability to excel in STEM, because we definitely have demonstrated that throughout history. A lot of times it is about not having access to the resources that are needed, whether it's for classes or being not looking at ability versus previously demonstrated um, grades or success academically, is giving those students another opportunity to be identified as being children who have the capacity to excel and to be given the resources that they need in order to catch up and to be able to demonstrate their true ability in those courses. And I can identify with all of that. I started off in STEM myself and switched over to psychology, although I still love statistics and mathematics. And also, in terms of Dr. White, we talked about African um, music and dance in terms of New Orleans music and the sense of community. That was something that I did also. I went to predominantly white high school, but after school, I was immersed in the Black community, so a Black church, and also African dance, African music, drumming, and so there's a way to have a sense of belonging where I didn't feel that necessarily in my school all the time. So I can appreciate how you brought all of those concepts together. Dr. West, over to you.
Yes, so now the third question that is individualized is for Dr. Franklin. We know that you have a book coming out. Well, I know, but I want you to tell everybody else about your book that is out, and I can't wait to get a hold of it. And I have been involved with you on a project about youth in the civil rights movement. So we want to give you space to really talk about youth. And, when I thought about it before I became involved in this project with you, when I heard youth in the civil rights movement, my brain automatically said college students, because everything that I had read was about college students. So I go right there to Greensboro and, thinking about, the lunch counter and droves of college students doing all kinds of things, taking over buildings and, making change, which was awesome and very inspiring. But what I learned in being a part of this project that you invited me to participate in was that students in K-12 schools, that elementary school kids, middle school kids, high school kids were very much involved in the civil rights movement. Would you talk about that, please?
Yes, I'm really, really happy that you invited me to participate in this, because the book will be out this month as part of Black History Month. It's called The Young Crusaders, the untold story of the children and teenagers who galvanized the civil rights movement. And there is a website, and I have a website that's up, and you can check that out, and then hopefully you'll get the book. So one of the things that most people are aware of or have know something about is the Birmingham Crusade, the children involved in the protests in Birmingham. So we know that the elementary schools, children as young as 6, 7, teenagers, etc., faced the dogs and the hoses associated with the civil rights protests in Birmingham, faced down Bull Connor in that instance, and we have there's video footage of the children being attacked by the police and being beaten and then being jailed, et cetera. And so we know about that. And there's actually a film on it. And on the website, I cite that film. It's called Mighty Times, The Children's Crusade, which is a documentary film on Birmingham and and I recommend it to it. So it's really, really wonderful. But the book, The Young Crusaders, is answering the question, if that's what elementary and junior high and high school students did in Birmingham, what did those students, those young people do in other places? So that's what the book really documents. And what you have is, and when I began to look at this, when I began to research it, I started in the 1990s working on this topic because I was doing research on the civil rights movement and these instances where the children were involved, elementary and high school students were involved, kept coming up. And so people asked me to do develop some curricular materials on this. And so I developed materials around the Little Rock Nine, the children the 9 Black students who desegregated Little Rock High School in 1957 and had to be escorted into the school by the U.S. Army and then were victimized by all kinds of attacks and threats during that school year that they were there. And so and you also had the protests at Girard College that was teenagers and participating, high school students participating in Philadelphia. And so I documented that. But as I began to look at communities around the country, and so I found that children and teenagers were active everywhere. They were active throughout the South. They were active in Chicago in various kinds of school boycotts. They participated in these huge boycotts to try to desegregate the public schools in Chicago. They participated in desegregation of public and huge boycotts. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of students, elementary, junior high, and high school students engaged in boycotting and participating in marches and protests to bring about the desegregation of the public schools in Chicago, in Cleveland, in Milwaukee, in New York, and so I document those in the Young Crusaders, the children's participation in those campaigns. But the more I looked, the students were active from the beginning of the civil rights movement in the Montgomery bus boycott. You had children and teenagers who were engaged in those protests. We know, some of us know a story of Rosa Parks, but also Claudette Colbert, Claudette, and Claudette, I can't think of the last name of mine. Claudette Colvin, I'm sorry, Claudette Colvin, who was 15 years old. And she was one of the plaintiffs in the case that eventually led to the desegregation of the public transit in Montgomery, Alabama. And at the trial, I'm just going to read what she said. She's 14 and she's testifying at the trial. And I'm just going to read what she says. She says, at that time, teenagers didn't like to ride the special school bus too much. If you had to stay after school for band practice or rehearsal or hang around for school activities, you still ride on a school pass, but on the regular bus. So she was on the bus one day after school, and the bus driver saw her sitting in the front of the bus, and he said, "Hey, get up. A white person wants to sit down." And I'm quoting her. He said, "Before he'd drive on, I'd have to get up." But Colvin wouldn't move. The bus driver asked her, "Why don't you get up?" She said, "They can't." He said, "We're not moving. I'm going to call the cops." She said, "No, I'm not getting up because I paid my fare. So I do not have to get up. It's my constitutional right to sit here just as much as that white lady. It's my constitutional right." And Claudette Colvin was eventually dragged off the bus, arrested, etc. And she became one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, along with Rosa Parks as in that desegregated the public transit in Montgomery. But what I found and what you find in the Young Crusaders in the book is instances in throughout the South, in Louisiana. Of course, you had the desegregation of the elementary schools by Ruby Bridges and the other three girls at the Madonna Elementary School in Louisiana. But at the same time, in the 1960s, you had the NAACP Youth Council involved in protests on Canal Street in downtown New Orleans, on Canal Street at the Woolworths, and supporting the calling for the desegregation of the bus boycott. And you also had in Plaquemines, not Plaquemine County, Plaquemines, the city, you had a core activists engaged in civil rights protests. The high schools, the students in the high school, students in Plaquemine heard that one of the cafeteria workers was arrested for her participation in these protests. And they then decided to hold a mass meeting. Then they marched on downtown in Plaquemine and began and marched into the courthouse. They were confronted by the police. They were tear gassed by the police. This is in fact, they were tear gassed by the police and they were arrested. The students then called a boycott of the high school, and each day they marched downtown Plaquemine and to protest the discrimination, the arrest of other students. In Plaquemine in 1963, the civil rights protests were dominated by the high school students. And so in the Young Crusaders, I have literally 50 or 60 places, locations that are discussed where the teenagers and the elementary school students participated in these protest marches and led to successes, important successes in the civil rights movement. And so once you read the Young Crusaders, you'll find that you really cannot understand the success of the civil rights campaigns without taking into account these teenagers, these children who put their bodies on the line in order to gain freedom. Their their demand was freedom now, and that's what they would take nothing less.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you. Thank you for really giving us just a little tidbit that, so we can read more and go into this. It was fascinating, not only for me in going through this, not being in history, being in the behavioral sciences, but for my students who were engaged in these projects that we did. I remember after we created, we engaged in this project where my students in the graduate counseling program were also gathering data about youth in the civil rights movement. But the assignments that I gave to them to take that and understand it and integrate it into their counselor identity was to ask these questions about what would you do if you were the school counselor? And these children are talking about these experiences. They're responding to what's happening in their lives. What are you doing? Are you out there marching with them? Or are you, as Dr. White mentioned, are you colluding with the oppressor and telling children that they have no worth? Are you denigrating them? What is your role? What do you see yourself doing? And so on. So they were very much involved. They wrote such meaningful assignments when they were engaged in the project. But what I remember is when we created the presentations, we had these huge panels with photos and that many of the students had selected from their research. So I got these counseling students being history students and learning how to engage in that kind of research rather than social science research. And I remember when we had the event and we brought these youth who are now in their 60s and 70s and brought them to do a panel. So as we're getting on the elevator to go up to the floor where the panel presentation was, and the actual panels to read and look at, my students, uh, and they were mixed, so they're both Black and white students, even though we're HBCU. My students got on the elevator with one of the panelists who had that they had read about, and she started mentioning who she was and what she had done. Without them knowing it, the students from my class were finishing her sentences. She was talking about what she had done. They had read it. They had read about what she had done, and they were listening in awe of meeting her. But I don't think they were even aware. They were finishing her sentences because they knew where she had been, what she had done. And it was such a beautiful moment for me as an instructor to see that what I had intended to happen in terms of their learning, in terms of their awareness, in terms of their ability to think critically, to be revolutionary in their thinking, had actually occurred. And so there was no difference between the past and the present, and they saw themselves as social agents. So I really appreciate you for doing that. Let me also add, to bring it more relevant to the present. So if there are any young people who are watching right now, there's a movie out on HBO Max that everybody's talking about, Judas and the Black Messiah, about Fred Hampton. And I just had a conversation this morning with my 30-year-old son, because he watched it and he was talking to me about it. But I was saying, where you been? I've been talking to you about this for the last 30 years. It's like you grew up with this. And he was fired up. It reminded him of his charge, that he's there to do something. He's not there to be comfortable in whatever he's doing right now. His job is to be fearless. And he talked to me about what he heard as his most memorable line from the movie. I told him, watch the documentary as well, please. But what he remembered from the movie was that Fred Hampton was feeding people, which then became the, free and reduced breakfast and lunch. But at the time, it was revolutionary. He was educating and tutoring children, because we know that schools are not really educating our children. He's doing this all at the tender age of 21. And when people said to him, you talking like that, they're going to kill you. He said, they're going to kill us anyway. So the question is, if I die, what have I done for the people? That's my son talking to me, captured by this. And I said, yes, 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 absolutely. So we have to reverse the experiences that they're having in these environments where they're being told that they don't matter, that they're not given the resources, that they're starting out in tremendous debt and can't catch up when they get out of college, all the things that you guys have mentioned. But more importantly, we have to free their minds, because it's not about the material resources. We can break through that if we have the support, if we have people in our lives who believe in us. We'll do anything. We will do anything and do great things. And the three of you are definitely examples of that. I'm gonna pass this back to Dr. West. We're a little bit over, but we think you guys have so much to offer that we're gonna let you keep talking for a little bit more before we try to answer some of the questions. Dr. West. You're on mute again.
I'm going to revamp the question that I plan to ask based upon what Dr. Franklin has just shared with us, and the knowledge of the extent to which elementary school children, middle school children, and high school children have been very much involved in the liberation of themselves and our community, our people as a whole, and in some ways saving America from itself. I think that knowledge is oftentimes not shared. Um, with us, either with in terms of our families and our communities, and definitely not in our school system. But that knowledge is extremely empowering. I want to get you and also the other panelists to talk about the ways in which um, sometimes parents, educators, and clinicians discourage Black children from exercising their voices, from exercising their power, right? Because that clearly they've demonstrated they have power to change things. Sometimes inadvertently, not meaning to, and other times intentionally, to get children to be compliant, obedient, um, to go along and get along. What do you see the role of the adults in children's lives? How do we not silence, not teach our children to silence their voices or to be afraid of exercising their power?
Well, um, when I came up in Catholic school and in the 60s at a very difficult racial time
Mhm.
period, although my parents and many Black parents supported the efforts of uh, SNCC and Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, a lot of times they were also very cautious. And a lot of parents felt that having your own mind, speaking up, rebelling, meant death.
Mhm.
And in order to protect your life, a lot of times they discourage that. One of the biggest problems that a lot of young people that went to Catholic school had is using and expressing creativity. Like, for example, I'm a jazz musician, and one of the biggest difficulties I had was the idea that, you're creating something that's coming from your mind and not from a piece of paper where someone else has, you know, written out notes, that this is completely your creation, your expression, and to be able to be, to get into yourself and be creative and know that it's all right to be that way is a difficult challenge. uh, has been for me, and I found that to be the case for a lot of young people that come up under systems that are sometimes repressive, under the guise of protecting youth,
Mm.
or under the guise of fear that you're going to move in a direction that your parents may not want you to. So it's difficult. I mean, of course, by the same token, there have been, musical families in which the lifestyle of musicians and being creative was a positive thing and encouraged. So you have different ends of the spectrum.
Mhm. I understand
I I would say that parents um, have to decide if they want to their children to participate and to learn about these things. I think that now we have a lot of materials about young people's participation in movements and protests, etc. And there are all kinds of books, children's books. There are many, many children's books on children's participation in the civil rights movement. And parents have to make the decision about whether or not they want to expose their children to this
that. Mhm.
as part of their moral upbringing, as part of their, because you have to decide that the children have to develop their own sense of their own identity, their own sense of what's right and what's good and what's important. And if the parents think that uh, dealing with things that they find to be wrong, to be unjust, to be something that should be changed, et cetera, and they and understand that these things do not have to be the way they are. They can change, and provide them with examples of how things have changed as a result of children and teenagers and adults acting acting together to try to improve, because it really is a sense of what is right what is wrong, what is just, and what is unjust. It's a sense of morality. And if you want your children to have this sense of morality, you can expose them to the things that are good in the society and the things in the society that are bad and the things in the society that should be changed, and make it clear to them that they have the power, they have the ability to actually intervene and to bring about changes themselves. And when you provide examples of this having happened in the past, and that's what the Young Crusaders is about, it's providing all of these examples, these blueprints of children who saw things that were wrong. It's sort of like, children, they say, oh, somebody took that candy from me, they have a sense of morality and what's right and wrong. And then you expose them to the things that are not just right and wrong in the family, what some brother did, what somebody in the community did, but also in the society. And then make it and let them know that it is possible for them to participate in activities to try to change the things that need to be changed, the things that are wrong in the society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would just add, I truly am embracing more and more this ideal that the children will lead us. And in fact, they are our hope and our savior. And so, there are times when we have to stand in the gap as they're developing their skills and as they truly lead us, right? And it's, we have a history of, in some ways, yes, life and death, at times depended on, um, whether they were perceived to be out of order by people. And so we tended to want to save them or shelter them from that. But I think, I find lots of inspiration and hope when I look at, the Black Lives Movement. Oh my gosh, the young people are fired up and ready to go, and it's like, yeah, sometimes we might have to get out of the way. And I'm saying, but, and trust them. And then, as I say, be there in the gap, doing the things that we can do to support them. But I do think we have to really embrace this ideal that they really are here to, they're going to make life better. And in some ways, we think about that's our charge too, as the adults in the room. But how we define that, we have to be open-minded about what that looks like. And, it doesn't look the same for every generation. And so I think some of I find some comfort in, even growing for me in that space of listening to young people. They often provide a very insightful perspective of what needs to be done and what's needed.
Exactly. I think that, you're all making really excellent points. And I think the whole issue of why. I know that Dr. Sidbury, you talked earlier about providing students with the why, about why are we doing this? How do we make STEM relevant? But we also need to think about why are children acting a certain way? Sometimes what looks like misbehavior is actually resistance to oppression, to racism. And we need to ask, why did you do that? Not just provide punishment about their behavior, but get into the root of it. And so I think all of that is important. And sometimes if we can't help, we need to get out of the way, right? Um, Sometimes we're holding Black children back from doing the right thing. But important thing also is that um, the students know that, Black children know that there's injustice as it relates to people of color and Black people in general, and to them, how they're being treated across multiple domains. So they're going to have a reaction. The question is, what type of reaction? What's an adaptive, healthy reaction? And what is a reaction or a response that leads to positive change? And so providing them with examples, like Dr. Franklin said, of, how Black children have been agents of positive change, like many, many times, not just one time. It's not a fluke or a rarity. It's very common, has been very common. And that provides them with a way, a mode of responding that allows them to feel empowered and to feel as though how they feel is relevant and important. And I think that is all very important for us all to consider as members of the community, as parents, as educators, and as clinicians, to keep all of those things in mind.
All right. This has been such a rich conversation. I wanted to call attention to a question that we got in the chat from Dr. Kent Butler regarding testing and assessment in schools. So Dr. Butler says, children often are not able to showcase their knowledge base because of the testing mechanisms and assessment tools in place that do not properly assess. How might we empower these students who possess the knowledge but are often discouraged by instructors that do not provide a myriad of testing modalities that rewards their intelligence? This is a general question for the panel.
We have to provide alternatives evaluation, sets of evaluations for our children, not just the standardized testing. And this is where, and we need to empower teachers to be held accountable for the learning that they produce in the children. And so that and that they have a role, they have a say about how the children will be evaluated. How that is the problem has been that the teaching has been disconnected from the evaluation, and the teachers don't necessarily have any input in what's being taught and how it's being tested and their own evaluation of it. And the young people can say that we are interested in a broad range of skills and activities and and things that they can accomplish themselves. We want the teachers to provide us with that teaching, with that learning experience, and then the teachers should be the ones who then evaluate them in how well they carried out, they learned these lessons, they carried it out. This disconnect between what the students want to learn, what the teachers want to teach, and what is being evaluated in standardized tests needs to be challenged. This needs to be challenged. And they say, they say, no, the teacher says that I can produce learning in these children in this way. The children say, oh, I want to learn this. They say, no, you've got to prepare for the test. And that has to be challenged and broken up. And it's something that I think that this pandemic has provided an opportunity for us to say, okay, the testing has stopped. This testing, we need a moratorium on the standardized testing. Now, what is it that the children need to know? What do the children want to know? What do the teachers say that they can impart to the students? And how will the teachers then evaluate their success with the students? And get away from the standardized testing and and but make sure that the teachers in other ways be held accountable for what they do with the children. I think that needs to be challenged. I mean, we're in a situation where the testing is not taking place, and they say, okay, well, do we need to start it up again, or should we come up with alternative ways of evaluating what the teachers are teaching and what the students are learning? I think that we're in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree with Dr. Franklin. And I think that, it needs to be a concerted effort among elected officials, school administrators, and parents to demand alternate and new and varied methods of evaluation. We know through studies and through many years of experiences that these standardized tests or not the all end and be all of accurate measurements of our children's intelligence and abilities. But unfortunately, so many children have been pigeonholed and isolated because of those test results or preparing for the test results. There are different ways of thinking, there are different ways of learning. And, we're in an age and a time now where more than ever we should be conscious of that and try to find different ways of looking at and measuring intelligence. But but again, it has to happen on the administrative level, whether we go through elected officials. But I think it has to start with parents, maybe parents, teachers, school administrators, elected officials together will have to demand that this needs to be done, because obviously the standardized testing method is not the most appropriate one for many children of color. So we need to find something else. But first, it has to be established that it needs to be done, it will be done, and coming down from the highest levels.
I totally agree. I think that there is a problem with testing. So as a psychologist, I've done a lot of testing, and there are times when the test results don't seem to match um, what the child's actual abilities seem to be. So I think that that is another piece, is that we need different ways of assessing ability and use and even performance. But the other piece is that oftentimes even those students who have been documented to have the aptitude oftentimes are not pushed into certain tracks where they get access to the classes or the courses that they need. Or they get into those courses and they find it so uncomfortable. Either they're the only, um, for example, for STEM, I'm sure Dr. Sidbury, you can talk about this too, but a lot of times they may be the only girl or the only African American, only person of color, and may feel uncomfortable in those situations. And so sometimes they go into the program and then they decide to withdraw because they feel uncomfortable in some way. And so I think that it's not just about, it is very much about correctly identifying those students who have the aptitude to be successful, but also changing the programs such that students who are actually appropriately tracked don't end up um, going back into or choosing not to be in that program because they're uncomfortable or feel that they're being discriminated against or oppressed in some way. I think that's another piece because there are plenty of times when students who could um, be placed in certain classes, such as advanced placement classes or like STEM, et cetera, just aren't placed there until someone asks a question about why hasn't this student been referred? And then that becomes a different kind of conversation. So I think it's both in terms of identifying students and then also making sure that they actually get placed in those programs, and those programs are hospitable to our students um, as well.
Okay. Well, we are coming up on the end of this panel, and I can see that we've just opened the door really to a lot of questions that we have. We've gained so much experience. I'm going to ask Dr. West to ask our final question, and then we'll tell you about what's next for CRESTS. You can find out what we're going to do next. So, Dr. West, you have the final question?
Yes. Okay. So the final question is, what message do you want to share with any children who may be watching this webinar right now?
Yeah,
Well, well, go ahead, Dr. Sidbury.
yeah, I would I would just really ask them to not give up on us adults, right?
Ah,
And for as much as we can, you know, we see, we believe, even when it doesn't look like we see you, we do see you. And so I think it's important that we have that kind of coming together on our how we see each other. That there certainly are responsibilities or things that we're responsible for as adults, that we don't want to burden our children with. but absolutely keep showing up, and we're going to be there with you, even when it doesn't look like that all the time. Um, but don't give up on us.
I would say to the children to stay creative, keep being inquisitive, asking questions, looking for answers for things, and ask adults about things when you can start doing that. Try to get your parents or teachers to give you a little reading list and start reading about things beyond what you have in school. But also, realize that you're an individual and you have great talent and potential, and that you should always try to grow and develop, because you can learn as much as you can, and you can use that in many different areas in many different ways. And one of the things that's great about children is that their minds are always questioning and wanting to know the answers to things, and I think that's a great thing. So keep doing that.
Mhm.
My advice to the children would be just keep on keeping on. That is, you have the power to uh, affect things around you. The future is yours. If you see something that looks like it's going to challenge your future, what it is that you would like to do with your life, then you should move to change that. That is the future. You are our future. The children, you are our future. And what is important to you for your future, we will try our best to make sure that you attain it. But think about what it is that you want for yourself, for your family, for your friends, for your community, and how you can contribute in bringing about those things in the future. The future is yours. And if there seems to be some things that will disrupt that future, or the things that you feel that you need in your life that will be important to you, complain about it, do something about it, because our future depends on you.
Hmm. Awesome. Dr. Westola Timothy?
Yeah, so finally, we are going to close out. We definitely mentioned to you about the contest, and we hope that you all participate in the contest because we want to be able to give away this money to you. And so please do that. Also, we have a Black History Month communique that went out. Some of you might have received it. In there, we have not only our events that are going on, I have some of my personal events that are happening. We also share from other organizations their Black History Month activities that are going on, but we also have some little fun things in there. Professor Kahinde Ishangi has a video of a dance video in there that she dedicates to Black people everywhere in the diaspora. And we also have a message from Dr. Rashawn, who is a traditional healer, and she sends us a spiritual message for us to stay focused in 2021. We appreciate that. We also have our first fact sheet coming out that's based on one of our concept papers that's up on our website, and that will be going out to you shortly. I know you're waiting. Where's the credentialing program? It's coming. It's coming. And you will be able to go through the entire training. We have a quick commercial video that I'd like to share with you. And that, let's see if it'll play. No, no technology. You never know. Here we go. It's coming. Hi, my name is Dr. Sarisi West Olatunji, and I am co-founder of the CREST programs. CREST stands for Culturally Responsive Evidence-Based Strategies for Traumatic Stress. Now, you may have read about the persistent underachievement among Black students. However, rarely is there discussion about the context for that, nor are we given effective strategies to resolve that. That's why my colleagues and I developed this culture-centered, trauma-informed care course that is designed for parents, community people, mental health professionals, and educators so that they can become better prepared to work with Black children and other children who are socially or culturally marginalized. Designed for those who would like to learn about culture-centered theories and practices, this course promises to be informative, engaging, and interactive. While we've all talked about the need for transformation, few of us know how to make that happen. Are you ready? We'd like to see you on that first day of class. Thank you. All right. Well, hi, my name is, enough of that. All right, well, that really brings us to the end. We thank you so much. We thank our panelists for taking time on Lundi Gras. That also coincides with President's Day. So there's a lot of things that you could have been doing, but thank you so much for saying yes. We hope that we can call on you in the future. We're not gonna stop, we're gonna keep going. We're not gonna let up, we're not gonna take a break. We're just gonna keep going because we know how important our children are to us. So yes, it's very, very likely that we'll call on you again to do a cameo for all kinds of things. We'll be doing podcasts, vodcasts, we'll be doing quick commercials like that. Also papers, whatever way you can continue to support this, we'll be calling on you for that. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. I see all of these people giving us comments. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. We're gonna hopefully be sending out more information to you. Thank you.